Hello and welcome to an episode of The Brain Game Changer, how heartfelt stories, awareness and education can change the game. Each week we delve into the experiences of amazing humans, advocates and organisations from all walks of life who share their adversities, the triumphs after tragedies, the milestones and those brain game changing moments right here in front of the mic. Through this journey together, we may find that we can learn some valuable tools, knowledge or education that will lead us into becoming game changers for ourselves, for someone around us, or even for our community. My name is Melissa. Thank you for inviting me into your space. It is great to be with you. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Brain Game Changer podcast, Season 1. In this week's episode, we headed to London in the UK, where I had the pleasure of speaking with Criminal Defence Solicitor Claire McGrath. Around 15 years ago, I participated in some work experience with the firm Claire was employed at, whilst I was considering moving into law after completing my education degree. Years have passed, however, it has been wonderful connecting over recent times. In this episode, Claire, also a partner and mother of 2 sons, shares the experiences surrounding the birth of her boys, motherhood, and a journey as a family with her partner Oliver when Finn was born with Down syndrome. We discuss recent UK law changes, public figures who are shining a light on raising awareness of Down syndrome, and Claire's purpose to also spread up-to-date, accurate and educated information to the mothers and families who need it. This is a beautiful and heartfelt interview, and I feel very grateful that Claire was happy to sit in front of the mic on this podcast to do so. Let's get into the interview. Good morning in the UK, Claire, and welcome to the Brain Game Changer podcast. It is great to have you with us.
Hello, Mel, and thank you so much for having me.
I was so touched by your story and also what you're trying to do in regards to your little boy, Finn. But before we start and we go down that journey of the reason why we're here, can you just tell me a little bit of a backstory? Just tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
Okay, so I'm right over the other side of the world in the UK. I live in London. I'm a criminal defence solicitor and also mum to 2 boys who are 8 and 5. Our paths crossed when you came over to do some work experience with us many years ago, and here we are now.
I've seen you in action. We're very lucky to have you. You're amazing at what you do. You're a full-time lawyer. You are a working mum who's balancing everything as well. So I'm just going to go back to when you first heard the news that you were pregnant with your firstborn, Sebastian.
That was a really nice surprise, and I remember it so clearly because we were literally about to embark on a European trip that we'd arranged, and we were so excited about it. And then it was still a good trip, but it turned out to have no alcohol involved, which was a shame for me because that wasn't quite what I'd planned. But anyway, roll on 7.5 months later, and I hadn't felt him move for probably about 24 hours, maybe a little bit longer, and I was a bit worried about that, so I went to the hospital. To cut a long story short, he was born by emergency C-section later that day because he had stopped moving and they had to just whip him out. So it was quite a stressful situation because we didn't know. At the point where he was born, we didn't know whether he was going to have survived or not and whether we were going to have a live baby or not. So that was quite tricky and a difficult time. But luckily he was okay. They had a team ready to work on him straight away. And he then ended up in the neonatal unit for a few weeks before we were able to take him home. But yes, it was a bit of a shock start to motherhood. We weren't ready at all. I was on my way to court that morning and I diverted because I just felt something wasn't right. So no maternity leave, no, just sort of crazy. He was 6 weeks early, so it was all a bit manic. But yes, he's now doing extremely well, and you would never know that he'd had that sort of crazy start. It was a bit dramatic, shall we say.
Thank you for sharing that, because I can only begin to imagine. You've got your first child, you're already feeling all the feels, all the anticipation. You research everything that you do, you go to the classes, you hear your friends give their versions of events, and then you experience a totally different scenario.
It was certainly not the plan. You know, in his usual, he's a kind of, it follows on from how he is now, really. It wasn't planned at all, but we thought, oh, this works out well because he's going to be born in September. He'll be the eldest in the school year, and that will be quite handy. And then, no, we weren't having any of that. So he's an August baby in the UK. I'm not sure how it works over in Australia, but he's one of the youngest in the school year. And so all of that extra sort of bits and pieces that he's had to contend with through being born just that little bit early. So, but yes, I can't complain. Everyone rallied around, and you know, he's, as I said, he's doing absolutely fine now. So, and he's an excellent big brother.
Oh, that is beautiful. That is so beautiful to hear, and I'm so happy to hear also that you had so much amazing support and everyone rallied around at such a difficult time. So, Sebastian's home, and you're adjusting to this new world. What was the time frame between the two boys when you found out you're pregnant with your second child?
So Sebastian would have been just coming up to 3, maybe a few months away from 3 at the time that I found out I was pregnant the second time. It was one of those scenarios, Mel, where we always wanted more than one because we wanted him to have a sibling, but there always never seemed to be the right time. I was back at work. It didn't seem to ever be the right time. So we just thought, right, we've just got to go for it and see what happens. Then it happened. So that pregnancy, it was a completely different kettle of fish because of what had happened with Sebastian. They kept me really closely monitored because they weren't really sure what had happened the first time around. They couldn't be 100% certain, but we'd had sort of a debrief at the hospital where they'd said to us, if you'd have left it any longer, basically wouldn't have your a live baby now. So I was sort of on high alert anyway because of that. And especially as I got to the time when Sebastian had been born, so, you know, the 7.5-month-ish point, I was really like a bit of a lunatic because I kept really overthinking the moving. And every 2 weeks or so, certainly towards the end of the pregnancy, I was being scanned and checked because they were really wanted to make sure that the same thing wasn't happening again. And then at about 37-ish weeks, because I was going to be induced anyway, but they decided that they thought maybe there was some changes and that the same thing, whatever it was, may have been happening again. So they decided to induce me, which they did. It was a long process. Yeah, and then Finn was born. So that was in January 2017. I was all proud of myself because I decided that I was going to have a natural birth this time, not a C-section. Because the first time around, I hadn't gone into labour. I felt like I cheated the process, that I hadn't experienced any of the usual things. So I decided I'd be a bit different the second time. So that was all fine. You know, he was born. I was all pleased with myself. And then he was handed to us. And we knew straight away, the minute we saw him, that he had Down syndrome. And that was a really difficult experience for us.
That moment, you've experienced, I guess, the traditions of a normal birth. He's a little happy bundle of joy. He gets handed to you in your arms.
Yeah.
And in that moment, you're just sort of like, oh, hang on, something seems different.
Yes.
And I think you described at the time that you waited until the midwife left the room before you both decided to react with each other.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So what I now know, after we did speak to each other, that we were both having the same thoughts at that time, but we didn't actually verbalise it to each other until we were on our own in the room and the midwife had left. So it was quite a period while they're sort of, you know, clearing you up and doing all the bits that they do. And then as soon as the midwife left, we sort of spoke to each other and said, you know, and I knew as soon as I saw him, I knew, but I kept thinking, I've never seen a newborn baby before because we didn't see Sebastian straight away. So maybe they look a bit scrunchy or whatever, but we knew. And it sounds dramatic, I know. And even now thinking back, it seems completely bonkers, but we thought our whole world had ended, that we just felt like life had sort of been ended, taken away from us. We felt absolutely horrified by the fact that this had happened to us. We were worried about the impact on Sebastian. That was our bit, you know, the first thing we were thinking about, that we'd chosen to have a sibling for him and what impact that would have on his life. It was a really, really difficult time. We really, really felt like it was the worst thing that could possibly happen to us. It was a real difficult time because while we felt that way, we had this little baby there And it was really, it's thinking back, it's awful really, because we did genuinely feel that way, and we really struggled with it. Yet there he was, gorgeous little thing. And when I looked at him, certainly for the first few days, all I could see was the Down syndrome. I couldn't see past that. And so we were going through the motions, doing the feeding and all the things we had to do. Even to this day, Mel, when I look back at those photos from the first few days, I find them quite difficult to look at, because, you know, we were all doing all the smiles and things, but I know what the feeling that was going on behind that. And I know now it's a normal way to feel. And I know that a lot of people who are in a similar scenario have felt that way, and it's okay. But at the time, the emotions are really raw, really, really raw.
Claire, I have to say thank you so much for sharing that. And I know you said I felt bonkers, but I think you sharing the honesty and the rawness of that moment will resonate with so many people. So as a result of this, do you stay in hospital longer? Do you have to have different types of tests? Are there different types of care?
We were quite lucky because Finn didn't have any of the physical difficulties that sometimes people and children who have Down syndrome have. So heart conditions are quite common, and there can also be issues with sort of bowel conditions and things like that, which require very, very quick intervention, sort of, you know, early intervention, and sometimes sort of care within the hospital environment up until the operation can happen. But we didn't have any of that. We were quite fortunate, and I think partly we'd had all those scans, so I think they probably would have picked up if there had have been any issues around physical health. They probably would have picked up on those. So but basically the midwife sort of came in and went again, came in again and went again, and then a poor young doctor came in and sort of said to us, obviously at that point we sort of tried to kind of do it for him by saying, we think we know what you're here to say. And so they did it as, it's just a blood test. So they can take a blood test to confirm the condition and confirm that that's what Finn had. And it took a few days to come back, but we did stay in the hospital, but that was more, not really, Finn wasn't in special care or anything. He was just with me, but they were making sure that he was feeding properly and all of those things. So we were in hospital for a week, and then we were discharged to go home.
Somewhere along the way in society, we've either seen a child with Down syndrome, that we might have watched a documentary about Down syndrome. I'm just going to explain. It's a genetic disorder caused when abnormal cell division results in an extra genetic material from chromosome 21. And chromosomes are like small packages of genes in the body. And with Down syndrome, there's no significant reasons. It's all by chance. And there's no known behavioural or environmental factors. That's what I found out with research. And there's no Down syndrome in your family, or no?
No, and there is a certain type of Down syndrome called translocation, which can have a genetic link, sort of a hereditary type of link. I'm not going to hold myself out as any expert on that, but that isn't the one that Finn has. Finn has just the completely by chance one of those things. So no, there's nobody in our family that has had Down syndrome previously. It's one of those things. And I think also there's lots of sort of myths that fly around in terms of what people think about what causes it and all the rest of it. But it's just one of those things. And actually, when Finn was born, I don't know if I'd even ever met anybody that had Down syndrome. It wasn't something we were aware of. I would describe us as completely ignorant about Down syndrome at all. We had very outdated views about what it meant, just sort of from, as you say, the documentaries, the historical, position and way people were treated. We then realised that actually that's not the thing at all. But one of the things that I think is quite a commonplace misconception is that it's all older mums. And actually, it really isn't. I mean, I suppose I did fit into that category of an older mum. But I've met so many people, even in person and online, through the Down syndrome community that are rocking about with a lovely child with Down syndrome, as well as older mums. So, there's a massive, massive community, very supportive community, all that have wonderful children with Down syndrome.
Because at the time that you gave birth to Finn, you were 38 years old. So is that still considered, I'm doing the talking brackets, is that considered quite old? Is that considered old now?
I think geriatric is the term that they use.
Wow.
So yeah, within the maternity sort of brackets of age, yeah, that was quite old. But I think it's quite commonplace now. I mean, I assume it's the same over there, but here certainly people are sort of, the age of people having children has significantly changed because people are having careers and things first. It didn't seem odd to me that I was having child number 2 at that sort of age, because a lot of my friends have had children, sort of second children, same sort of age. But yes, I was very much classed as an older mum that time round.
That's amazing that we still have that type of language used. To me, 38 doesn't seem that old for women in the year of 2022, where women are having children in their 40s.
Yeah.
Where there's lots of amazing resources and facilities and amazing care to do so in a healthy manner. So
yeah,
I'm still shaking my head about that. That's still at 38. Claire is considered geriatric pregnancy.
Right.
So you're at home, and again, you're adjusting to this new world. You're feeling all the different emotions. You've got this beautiful bundle of joy. How was it for you telling your family and friends at the time? Because obviously everyone knew you were pregnant. How was it for you at the time to share the news? What was your strategy, or was there any?
I have to say that my partner, Oliver, who took a big brunt of the telling people, because I was still in hospital. And of course, as you say, everybody knew that we were, having this baby, and, from parents to friends, siblings. And then, Sebastian had literally just started nursery. So we had a whole group of new sort of school mum friends that I hadn't known for very long. And we're obviously at the school gate every day, waiting to sort of, find out what was happening. And then, so Oliver, I didn't have to do any of it, I must be honest. Oliver did the phoning of our mums to tell them, and, the sort of telling everyone at school and things like that. So it was funny because it was a bit of an odd scenario where you were saying, it's lovely news, we've had a baby, it's a boy. And it's difficult to explain, but you felt compelled to then say, but, and I don't really know why. Even thinking about it now, I don't really know why, but it felt like we felt like we almost couldn't say, oh yes, we've had a baby, it's a boy. We felt we were sort of then saying, oh, but he's got Down syndrome. And it was really, thinking back now, I hadn't really thought about it particularly in that way, but it did seem, I suppose it was a bit strange that we felt that we had to sort of justify it or get it out there almost before they saw him, I suppose, because then obviously, because it's such a, obviously if you see somebody with Down syndrome, you know that they have it. So it's such a physical, so many physical features. So I think in that regard, it's a bit odd really that we felt the need to do that. But that is, Oliver took the brunt definitely on all of that side of things.
I'm hearing layers to this situation that you're all doing your best to move through. It is almost like you're preparing people for what is going to be clearly obvious when meeting Finn. So you're trying to make that moment as stress-free, comfortable, and reassuring and acceptable as possible.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely right. And it's interesting because, as I said already, when he was born, we were so ignorant about, we were no education about it at all. And we suddenly found ourselves thrown into this brand new world. And we wanted to do everything that we could to educate ourselves, to learn about Finn, to learn about the condition, what we needed to do. And there's so many things that we found out and we educated ourselves on. I did want to say that when we were still in hospital, one of the things that made a significant, and I might say the significant difference for us, was that we were handed a pack. It's called a welcome pack. And it was something that had been prepared by our local support group. And we were given this support pack. And I have to say, it took me a couple of days to sort of open it and look at it. And in fact, my sister came in and said, right, I'll have a look at it, see what it says, and then I'll see if I think it's going to be helpful. And that for me was the big game changer, if I can quote the title of this, because we then realised that down the road from us, literally 5 minutes away, there were a whole community of people that we could reach out to. And that for me was the big thing for me that changed everything and we knew then we were going to be okay. And we reached out straight away to the lady that runs it. Her name's Lou. She's amazing. She emailed me straight back. I remember sitting on my phone thinking, oh, has she emailed back yet? Has she emailed back yet? And when Finn was 10 days old, we went to the first meeting, the support group meeting. And loads of the parents came out, especially to make sure there were loads of them there to welcome us, to tell us it's going to be okay, and all of those things. And we're still part of that now, and it's the most amazing support group. And to have that local support is so significant for us. So I just wanted to mention that, because that straight away, having that to know that you're not on your own has been really important for us.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's so wonderful that you have this amazing support group. And it's funny, Claire, no matter who I speak to, whether it's yourself, a mum with a Down syndrome child, someone who's had a stroke, someone who's dealing with whatever adversity it is, that comfort of knowing there's a support group is the same theme that I hear in all the interviews. And it's so important. People underestimate the value of feeling connected to a community that will hear you, that will see you, that will understand you. You can't pay enough money for that.
The way I would describe it is being amongst people who get it. I have the most wonderful friends and family. I'm very, very lucky that I have really close, supportive friends and family. And they've educated themselves. They've taken steps to look into what it means and what they can do. But to be able to actually be amongst people who you don't have to say anything because they just get it. And those little teeny tiny things that you might need a little bit of a boost up sometimes, you can either give that or you can receive it if you need it. So it's quite a nice reciprocal arrangement where we can all help each other.
What's it like when we start getting to the point now where Sebastian's already at school? What's the journey like for Finn leading into the education system?
Again, it's a decision we had to make as to which route we wanted to go down, whether we felt that we wanted to send him to a mainstream primary school, and that's what we decided to do. We wanted him to have that opportunity. And there is certainly a lot of research to show that is, for children who are able to manage in that environment, that's a really good place for them to be amongst their peers, to learn from and be amongst. So that was a decision that we made. And we're very lucky because Sebastian's school is a really lovely school, and they are very well set up for looking after and assisting and teaching children with special educational needs. So we did have to go through the hoops with the local council of trying to get the provision in place that he needed to get his one-to-one support at school because Finn's doing really well, but he needs that support in order to make sure that he can reach his potential. And for us, I think that's the key thing. I've always said to the staff at the school and to anyone that will listen to me, actually, he can do things, and he just needs not to be underestimated. And I think one of the things about having a condition that is obvious straight away is it's quite easy for him to be underestimated, because people will just see him and think, oh, he's got Down syndrome. He won't be able to do that. And that was my real big thing, that I didn't want that to happen. And I have to say that after a bit of a fight, we did have to have a bit of a fight about it, but nowhere near as bad as some other families have had it. I would say that the process for trying to get it's called an education healthcare plan, that the process for having to get that in place is quite a painful one. And as I've already said, I have a background in law. I practice law every day. I'm used to dealing with detailed documents, and sometimes ones that don't make much sense. But this process was something else altogether. I found it really difficult to navigate. And while I recognise that part of the reason I found that difficult to navigate was because it was about my own child, it was just, the process is a really difficult one. And how difficult I found it, how on earth people are supposed to navigate that to make sure that they're getting the best provision for their children. That really opened my eyes to that. But for me personally, I wanted him to have the full package of support. And they eventually did come back and say, yes, he could have that. So that meant for us that when we went into the school environment, the school had what they needed to be able to provide him with a one-to-one teaching assistant who is with him throughout the day. And we've fallen on our feet because his teaching assistant is amazing. She is absolutely amazing. We're so lucky. This is the bits where I sort of get a bit emotional about it all, because it's what's happening right now. And he's, I know that with his actual teacher is brilliant. She couldn't be more supportive and adapt, looking to make sure that Finn's part of the class and all of those things that I was worried about. The class teaching assistant's also amazing. And then his one-to-one teacher we're just so lucky that the 3 people that are involved in his care at school are just all absolutely wonderful. And, the lady that runs the special needs educational work within the school, she's called the Senko. She's amazing. The head teacher's on board, and in fact, funnily enough, we've literally just had, I don't know if they have the same over there, we had an Ofsted inspection. So they come into the school and they literally had it a few weeks ago. And I must tell you, because I thought it was so nice, that the report we were sent the report yesterday, and this is what it said. Difference is actively celebrated. Leaders collaborate with parents to help the whole community understand disability. Pupils have deep respect for their peers with SEND. This is a truly inclusive school. And that's coming from Ofsted. So, the fact that Finn is in that school, is in that environment where he's just another child in the class, is so crucial to us. And I was so worried. I think when we spoke before, I remember we found out which class he was going to be in, and we, the WhatsApp group got set up, and all the parents started sending photos of their families and things. And I thought, oh, here we go. I decided in the end, I thought about how to deal with it, and in the end, I just decided to bite the bullet, and I sent a photo, and I said, "This is us. You probably noticed Finn's got Down syndrome. It's not. I'm really happy to talk about it. As you might have gathered, I quite like chatting." So I'm quite happy to talk. Please, no question is taboo. I'm not going to get upset by a question if and another thing that people worry about is how they say things and the wording that they use and whether that's going to be offensive. And I think sometimes people within the community do find the way in which people speak about it quite difficult to deal with. But for me, I'd much rather somebody feel that they can come and ask me a question or talk to me about it without having to worry about how they're saying it. I'd much rather that dialogue be opened up rather than them thinking, oh, I better not say that because I might say the wrong thing. All my worries about him not being invited to the parties, for example, absolutely nonsense. He's been at all the parties. The class are amazing. The kids are so nice. A lovely little girl in his class sent home little pictures that she's drawn him over the last few days. And yeah, they noticed that there are a few differences. But on the whole, they just get on with it. Like he's just one of the crew. That's all I really want for him.
Oh, Claire, there's so many things I could say. I wanted to cry when you just read out the Ofsted. I worked in the education system for a little while as well in the UK. I'm very aware of the Ofsted process. It's a rigorous task. To be given such an outstanding response for that school is phenomenal. And one thing that you shared with me, there's already about 6 or 7 other children with Down syndrome in this mainstream school.
Yeah.
I mean, that blew my mind when you told me, because I had a conversation with an amazing teacher only in the last couple of days. And he is a teacher at a specialist school which caters to students with intellectual, physical, or for multiple disabilities. And I reached out to him just to try and get an idea. And this school's got a beautiful reputation for all the amazing work that it does. But one thing I did ask him, I'm like, how many children do you have with Down syndrome at your specialist school? And I'm not trying to use the word specialist in any demeaning way or anything. It just caters to specific children. And he said, we have about 8 to 10.
Really?
Yeah. So they have the same amount of children that you do in a mainstream school.
Yeah.
And even he said, he's like, that's quite, unique. It's very rare. But he was also happy to hear that you are a mainstream school supporting children to navigate through the normalities of everyday life into school.
Absolutely. The school are very well set up. They make sure that the training is there, and that the teachers that are working with, the class teachers as well as the one-to-one teaching assistants are trained, and they know what they're doing, and so that they can get the best out of them. And of course, as the same as any other school, there are also a number of children with other needs. And I think that's an interesting one, because we had a coffee morning recently that the school set up for parents to come along with, for parents with kids with additional needs, and anyone else who wanted to come. But generally speaking, it tends to be the same ones. And I was saying to my crew of mums that've got the children with Down syndrome, we need to be really careful, because just want to make sure that everybody's included. And it's a funny situation, because we're always shouting about inclusivity, and we want to be, and then it's just interesting to make sure that we don't become this sort of little group that is just, there's so many of us, and that actually all of the parents of children with any additional needs should be properly supported. And it's quite nice to meet other mums and dads that have got kids in the school that have got other needs, to make sure that they're all being met.
What I love is the fact that you also raise the awareness for inclusivity. You decide to then pave the way and create even more understanding and more education. And you team up with another mum who has a child with Down syndrome. And on March 21st, which is also the International Day of Down Syndrome, recognising Down syndrome and celebrating Down syndrome, you and this mum decide to speak to the whole school about what Down syndrome is all about.
We did, myself and another lady who's also got a child with Down syndrome in reception. So we both got kids in reception. So between us, we spoke to the whole of the school that day. And it was amazing, because the kids were so receptive. And actually quite a few parents contacted me afterwards and said, "Oh, my child said that you spoke," and that, they remembered things. We taught them their names in Makaton and things like that. So stuff that was sort of a bit personal to them that they might remember. So, but the key message was, which is what I'm always banging on about, it's okay to be different. Differences should be celebrated, and just to recognise that, really, to just try and reinforce and emphasise that.
How many children did you speak to that day?
Oh, there's a lot of children in the school. So it's a 3-form entry school. So there's 90 children in each year.
That's between 600 and 700 children that you spoke to that day.
Yeah.
And they are then spreading the awareness or paying it forward by going home and going, "Guess what, Mum? Guess what, Dad? We had these people come today and they spoke about Down syndrome." And that is how it all starts.
Well, this is the thing, that it becomes that it's not a thing. It's just, "Oh yeah, I went to school with somebody with Down syndrome," or there's a kid in my class with Down syndrome, whatever it might be. That it's not this big, scary, unseen thing that you have to be worried about, that you have to be, concerned about and anxious about. So yeah, that's what it's about, really. That's what we're trying to achieve. Obviously the older ones, we gave them a bit of a science, because they were able to understand that, so that we were able to give them a bit of the science about the chromosomes and all of that sort of thing. But for the younger ones, it's very much just a basic, everyone's different, and that's good. It's good to be different. That's sort of how we pitched it, really.
It's great that you mentioned, everyone's different, and just embracing everyone, because unfortunately Down syndrome still has stigma. It still has a draconian type of language attached to it. In the UK, over the last 12 to 18 months, Down syndrome's been highlighted and made front page news. I'll add the example. So a beautiful, amazing woman, and kudos to her. I can't even begin to be in her shoes. Heidi Krauter, a woman in her 20s with Down syndrome, who took the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care to court. She challenged the legislation, which is about allowing fetuses with the condition to be aborted up until birth. And as you and I have also spoken, we're not here to preach or give any advice about what you should or shouldn't do. This is about people have a choice. However, it needs to be a proper informed choice. And unfortunately, there's still so much information out there that is so outdated.
Yeah.
We're just here to just try and shine a light on what's available today. Here's the information.
I think that's really important. I think it's really important to make it clear that this conversation is not about trying to influence people's decisions about what is right for them. And I think that it's really important to make it clear that myself, as a woman, as a mum, I'm very much pro-choice. I think everybody should have a choice and they should make the choice that is right for them, without any exceptions. However, what you've just said is my issue, that I feel that anybody who's faced with the dilemma, and I know how they will feel because I know how I felt when it happened to me in terms of finding out, and it must be even more challenging when you haven't even got your baby in front of you. But it's just about the education and about people being able to inform themselves in a way, in a realistic way. I'm not saying in a way that is all bells and whistles, making it sound like it's a really rosy life, but just a realistic, informed position so that somebody can then make whatever choice is right for them, but with that proper information. And I think that's the real thing for me.
This does generate a lot of debate.
Absolutely.
Many different schools of thought about this. But the thing I admire the most about Heidi is that this wasn't just a minor case. This case went to the High Court, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And she took the Secretary of State. I mean, she's also not dealing with a light little matter either. She's taking the government to court and just saying, you have this act. This is what the act highlights. We are aware it does create a lot of different views and and it challenges a lot of cultures. It challenges a lot of previous medical research, I guess what I'm trying to say. However, what you're doing is you're putting a negative stigma on a disability when we are trying to positively represent it.
The act itself that she was challenging is old. And what it says basically is that if a child is diagnosed pre-birth with a particular condition, Down syndrome being one of them, then that fetus can be disposed of up until birth. So that's the thing, that it's the trying to balance the way in which in 2022 we are trying to celebrate difference. We're trying to say that everybody should be able to be themselves. And then you're trying to match that against this legislation, which says that purely because you have Down syndrome, it's not as simple as that. There are other conditions and things that it's not what I'm trying to talk about, but specifically in relation to Down syndrome, that just because you have a diagnosis pre-birth of that condition, I think it's something like up until you enter the birth canal, that baby can be aborted just because of that. It's just trying to match those two positions that's quite difficult. And I think for people who have Down syndrome or parents of children with Down syndrome, it's really difficult because personally, and I can only speak for myself, in years to come, Finn may say to me one day, well, why is that? Why is it that because of who I am, just because of me having this extra chromosome, why would that have been okay? Am I not worthy enough? Is my life not good enough? Am I second rate in some way? Would it have been okay legally for a doctor to have terminated my life just because I've got this extra chromosome, just because of who I am, just because of me being me? And I think that, for me, that's the thing that really gets me, that it's a real significant issue, I think, and one that comes down to education. And it's really tricky because I'm not suggesting for a second that people shouldn't have choice, even at that late stage. It's somebody's choice. It would never be an easy decision to make, I'm sure. But I do think that it is something that Heidi's right to be pushing for, because it's something that does need to be reconsidered given the age of the Act and the way in which society tries to be inclusive now.
Well, the Act was actually 1967, so we're getting back to 55 years ago. And even in the medical world, and even in Down syndrome from 55 years ago until now, there are so many resources available. You know, Down syndrome can come with lots of different physical adversities that require surgery. However, they're quite mainstream now in how they can do that. They're very straightforward procedures that can still get very successful results.
Well, and also I think that's a really good point that you raised, that about the changes in things like the medicine, because, years ago, a lot of children died early but it was because a lot of them had heart conditions, and now they know what they're doing. They repair them. It's fine. Once it's repaired, there's not a problem. Or there was always a thing years ago where they didn't think children with Down syndrome or people with Down syndrome could read. And it's nothing to do with the fact they couldn't read. It was because they couldn't see. So when you've got people actually looking at their eyes and working about the difficulties they might have with their eyes, all caused by this extra chromosome, actually, people with Down syndrome, of course they can read, So, and there's been much more research done about the most appropriate learning styles and how, if you teach in this way, you can get some really amazing results. That's what it is, that things have changed so much in terms of not just, as I was saying, attitudes, but as you point out rightly, that in terms of the way in which we can make sure that people who have Down syndrome can reach their full potential, rather than, as it was, just have no expectations of them at all. And unfortunately, obviously, there was a lot of times where people would be placed into institutions rather than taken home with their families. And so that as well is going to stunt people reaching their potential, because they're not in the environment that now people are, where they're with their families and they're just treated as one of the children in the family, with the love and support that everybody else would have.
We've got all these amazing facilities and resources and access in the year of 2022. I'm going to highlight, though, another story that also made global news back in February 2022. The North Macedonian president, I'm going to do my best to say his name, Stevo Penarovsky, walks a little girl with Down syndrome into school after learning that she's being bullied. And that made headlines everywhere, and he's been praised for shining a light on children with difference, children with disabilities, and the fact that they need to be inclusive in our everyday community, including our school community. And he said, I'm just going to quote something that he said, prejudice should not be an obstacle to building an equal and just society for all. Empathy is our moral obligation. The behaviour of those who endanger children's rights is unacceptable, especially when it comes to children with atypical or not neurotypical development. Now, the thing in learning about this case, and this really got under my skin, is it wasn't the children who were making it difficult for the little girl. It was the children's parents who were boycotting them being in the same classroom as her. Honestly, that stayed with me for days, because how can this next generation try and go forward when we're promoting so much inclusivity and so much acceptance of all, when they're going home at night and talking to parents who are still holding on to just unrealistic views about what a child with Down syndrome is. And what I loved is that the school stood their ground and supported the family. And I guess also, if you've got the president knocking at the door of the school, everyone's got to listen.
Yeah, that's the thing, because you can't, you just have to hope that people are going to embrace it and not think. And that was part of, as I said earlier, the concerns I had. Would parents see Finn and think, oh no, I don't want that child in my child's class, with the, again, preconceptions, whether he'd be disruptive or any of the things they might think that he would be, without even giving him the chance to get to know him or even to observe him. And I suspect that probably in that case that it's all about preconceptions and lack of education and lack of knowledge and ignorance, which is exactly where I was, before I had Finn. And so it's not a criticism of people, because if it's not something that is in your world, that you're aware of, that you're not going to have knowledge of it. But that's part of what I'm trying to do through talking to you and through my very limited sort of Facebook, posts and things that I sometimes put, just to try to spread the word. And I've got a close friend of mine who, she's very keen on sort of trying to raise awareness and raise money as well around for a charity that's very close to us, that's been giving Finn sort of therapy and support and supports families. And so it's little bits like that. even if somebody on my Facebook that I haven't seen since I was at school happened to speak to somebody one day and they said, oh, hang on a minute, there's somebody on my Facebook that I went to school with who's got a child. It's just about having it out there that just as and when people might need it, that they know that there are places they can go for support.
I know you, and I know you are someone that even if you didn't have a child with Down syndrome, if it was your sister or someone who was a good friend, you were someone who would embrace learning as much as you could to provide support and awareness and acceptance. People have a choice. People have a choice about whether they want to learn, no matter what age they are, they want to accept and embrace. I think the thing that's frustrating, and I'll use the example of those parents in North Macedonia, is they did not want to even try. They just saw it as a massive stigma and then decided to act that way.
Yeah.
So it's amazing that there are people who still express a human side of themselves and think, okay, I'm ignorant. I don't know anything about it. I didn't know that much about Down syndrome myself, but since meeting you, I am learning more just in 2 or 3 conversations that we're having.
Yeah.
Another one, which is in a totally different direction, Victoria's Secrets.
Yes.
The massive model organisation extravaganza. Again, this year, February 2022, they employ their first model with Down syndrome. Her name is Sophia Juria. I hope I've got that right. Sorry, Sophia, if I've said it wrong. She is the first to be employed by Victoria's Secret because in recent years they've been under scrutiny for their lack of diversity and a more realistic representation. She's only young. She's 25 years old. I follow her on Instagram just to see what she does, just to see what she represents. She is a walking ball of positivity. She's always exerting about embracing yourself, about loving yourself, no matter who you are, no matter what you present with. And she also has over 600,000 followers.
Yeah.
And she is also a marketing machine, advertising and promoting everything from health products to beauty products.
Yeah.
And it's all about being good to your body, good to yourself, and it's just amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think certainly over the last, 12, even longer, 24 months, the visibility of people with Down syndrome in advertising, on TV, in the media, things like that, has certainly changed. Before, you would never see, as you say, a model with Down syndrome advertising anything. But now you'll see quite, for Marks and Spencer's, or certainly River Island, or, those sorts of places have had billboards in their shops and advertising their products with using models with Down syndrome, children and adults. And there's also a brilliant actress called Sarah Gordy, who has been in a lot of different things. She does stage shows, and she's also has Down syndrome. But talking about Call the Midwife, I think she's the producer of Call the Midwife. I think she had or has a brother with Down syndrome. There's a family connection in any event, and they've been quite instrumental in being behind the bill that has been passed. And so there's been quite a lot of celebrity support, if you like, for that. So these actors and actresses have been involved in sort of supporting that, giving their weight to it. So it's all happening. It's certainly all happening, that's for sure.
So I'm just going to mention, as you've just stated, the bill. So even though Heidi presented this case, unfortunately, she didn't win the case. However, what it has created is a snowball effect, and there's now been the implementation of a new Down syndrome bill. What can you tell us about that?
So, yeah, that's something that actually has been going through. And one of the members of Parliament, who is Dr. Liam Fox MP, he decided to present it as a private member's bill, which is a particular way of trying to get something through. And we were lucky enough, there's a brilliant group of people that were set up called the National Down Syndrome Policy Group. I hope I've got that correct. And they were instrumental in pushing this through. And there's some amazing people in that group, including our lovely Lou that runs our local support group. So we've got a really, local connection to that and what's happening. But amazingly, it got through the first reading without any objections or anything from anyone in the Commons, which was pretty amazing. And then there was a bit of a debate about it in the Lords, but it still went through. And I'm pleased to say that it finally received royal assent, I think, on the 28th of April.
Oh, amazing.
Mm-hmm. So it is now that we're now going to have a Down Syndrome Act. What's happening now is that there's consultations about what it's going to look like and what it's going to contain. But the idea behind it is that it's to make sure that the services legally will be put in place, that the services have to be provided for people in line with their needs. So across the board in terms of education, healthcare, all sorts of areas. But the minutiae of what exactly it's going to mean is being thrashed out as we speak. Certainly for me as a parent of a young child with Down syndrome, as Finn's still only 5, the fact that there's going to be some protections in place for him to make sure that there's some sort of recourse if people aren't giving him that support, especially as he gets older and we might not be around anymore, because that is a huge concern for people, for parents, I think, who have children with Down syndrome or any other significant disability, where once we're not around anymore, what's going to happen to our child and what's going to happen to who's going to care for them. And also I don't want that to fall just on Sebastian's shoulders, because I don't think that that's appropriate for a sibling. I think I want them to be brothers. I don't want Sebastian ever having to feel that he's required to look after Finn. And I mean, we're going to be doing all we can to make Finn as independent as possible in terms of being able to live in his own right as best he can. But we have to recognise that he is going to need support. And hopefully this act will now make sure that things are in place, that all the potential and everything that our children are reaching can be continued, with the support can continue, they can continue to contribute. And that's really important, I think.
What you've just raised is so important because, as you said, this bill has come in right now and people have been lobbying and advocating for many years to see progress. You've spoken about your concerns and the trials and tribulations that have come along the way with having Finn, but would you say your mindset is more optimistic now about his future?
Yes, I think so. I would say that's fair. I mean, I feel like we live in a society now, I hope, where things are improving for people who may have differences, may have things that historically years ago would have been such a big problem, big stigma, big taboo, would have just been squirreled away from mainstream society. And I think that things have changed, and I think that the more visible and the more integrated Finn and other people with conditions such as Down syndrome can be, the better that is for everybody. It's hard because I think sometimes when I talk to people and they still, without meaning it in a derogatory way, still feel like it's such a big thing and he's just going to be sort of unable to do anything. And then when they meet him and they realise actually that isn't the reality. And I honestly do think if we give him the right support now, he will be able to contribute positively to society. He will be able to have a job. I'm not suggesting that he's going to be, a nuclear scientist, but he will be able to be something positive and give something back. And I think that's really important, that people realise that is what the future is now. There are people working for opportunities for people with Down syndrome alongside other things, I'm sure, but I'm just obviously immersed in this particular world about finding paid employment, because there are so many people with Down syndrome who are working, but it's all voluntary. They don't get paid. So the percentage of people who are actually getting paid work is very small indeed. So I'm hoping the way in which they learn the best can be implemented. That will have a knock-on impact into the jobs that people can do and the contribution and the visibility, as we've discussed. I'm feeling positive.
Credit to you. I'm a primary school teacher, and I know one audience that is a tough audience is a classroom full of kids. So credit to you and your team who spoke to that amazing school that day. What is on the horizon? What are you hoping to do more of to help create awareness?
One of the things that certainly the local support group are doing, and we're all obviously part of that, is to try to really keep the visibility up of the awareness and things. So they've been doing fundraising to make sure that we can keep the welcome packs stocked up within the hospitals, because again, that is really important in terms of for people who are maybe having that experience of finding out their child has been born with Down syndrome. So dealing with the people that need that support initially, but also in terms of the wider community, just making sure we're out there having stands at the hospitals, going to speak to midwives, going to speak to doctors, going to speak to those people who are delivering these messages to the next generation of midwives, for example, and things like that, so that it's not I'm really sorry that your child's got Down syndrome, or I'm really sorry that the test has come back that it's, the chance for you having a child with Down syndrome is significantly high, or your child definitely has Down syndrome, your unborn child. When would you like to put the termination in? So just trying to make sure that the language is changed. It's just about educating. The conversations you have with people it's amazing really to hear that people are genuinely, they want to know, they want to talk to you, and that's really positive.
Part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast is because we're now also in a society and in a world of technology where so many conversations are happening and so many stories are shared. People resonate with stories. As humans, we resonate with that connectiveness with another human or another community. That is how we are able to then internalize and go, okay, I get that. I can see that. I hear that. So I'm going to just ask a couple of questions more about you as a family. How would you describe Sebastian as a big brother to Finn?
That's an interesting one, bringing it back round to this really, because it's very easy to paint it out as a rosy picture and say, oh, all these wonderful things. And, because actually, of course, it's not always like that. But I think that's the situation in any family. I think that, everyone has their challenges, and yet Finn can have his challenges. But generally speaking, you just get on with it because it's your family. So you don't think, oh, how different is my life to anybody else's? You just get on with it. And Sebastian is just, I must say, he is an amazing little boy, regardless. He's a really lovely boy. He's lovely to have a conversation with. He's quite shy. He's not great outside of the family environment in terms of, he likes to sort of be within people he knows. But he's just wonderful. He's a really wonderful boy. And he's an amazing brother. Like, they have a really lovely relationship. He sometimes is the translator, for example. Finn's trying to say something, and you're like, "What are you saying, Finn?" And Sebastian pipe up, "Oh, this is what he's trying to say." So they've got a really lovely bond, a really lovely relationship, and it worries me sometimes that in the future, when that time comes where somebody does say something to Sebastian about his brother, how he'll be affected by that, because it will happen, I'm sure, because that's just life. But he doesn't see him as any different. He's just his brother. That's all they know.
What connections does he make about Finn and Down syndrome? What sort of language is he using? Because he's 7 now.
He's 8. We've done it in layers. So when he was young, Finn might take a little bit longer to talk. He might take a little bit longer to walk. That he might need a bit more time. But he's get there. And then as he's gotten older, we've been able to explain, because he likes to know the science. That's the way his brain works. So he wants to understand what it means, what the chromosomes look like. And as anyone who knows me, I do love a picture of these chromosomes looking like socks. And I'm sharing that every 5 seconds because I love that picture, because it just shows all the chromosomes and then the little extra one. And I think for children, that's a real visual representation that you can see exactly what it means and exactly what's gone on. So he understands now what it means. When we went in to talk to the class or the school, in the upper school assembly where we were talking to the big ones, he's in year 4, so he's in that cohort. And he stood up and read a poem about his brother in that assembly, and I was so proud of him, because he's quite shy, as I said, and he actually got up in front of all those kids and read his poem. Sort of his class seemed to be really proud of him, and they were like, sort of at the end of the day, kids who he didn't even know were saying, "Oh, well done," and just it was really nice that support about the poem was about my brother has got Down syndrome, yet the support was still there and within school, and that was really nice. So we try to sort of keep him as engaged as we can with it all, and we're trying really hard to sort of have times where we'll take him out, just him. The thing is, Finn can be he can take over the time because, for example, he loves running. It's a sensory thing. So when we go to school, he runs to school. So we all run to school. So Sebastian doesn't have a choice as to whether he wants to run or not. We all run to school. So it's little things like that. But again, it's just our life. It's not really as if it's any, we just get on with it. So yeah, but we're very lucky that Sebastian is Sebastian because he's just the best. And we're very, very lucky that he's so lovely and such a good boy.
I'm not surprised. I have no doubt he's an absolute credit to you, and he's also got a lot of his mum's amazing nature and personality and demeanour, I have no doubt. How have things been for you and Oliver as a married couple, and then you already go through this with Sebastian, you go through your own journey with that, and then Finn comes along presenting with Down syndrome. How have things been for you and Oliver? I'm sure you've come together and also dealt with it internally and externally away from each other as well through all this.
There have been challenges. I mean, we're lucky enough that we haven't had some of the massive things that some families that we know of children with Down syndrome have had. So, for example, where their children have had to have sort of open heart surgery and things. So there's been lengthy hospital stays to contend with, and obviously one parent having to stay at the hospital and things like that. We've been really lucky that we haven't had any of those things to worry about. However, yes, we dealt with it in a different way to start with. I don't know. I think I try generally in my life to be quite a positive person. I think it takes quite a lot to knock me. I think, and I think we're quite good at. It seems to match that if one of us is, I should say, having a down day, the other one sort of is on a good day, so we can bring each other up or sort of step in, so we work quite well in that together in that respect. And I think the biggest challenge we have with Finn is he doesn't sleep very well. So that can be challenging because our lives now at the moment particularly are that Finn will go down to bed, he will sleep in his own bed. He's got a nice bed, a lovely fancy bed that we bought him, that he wouldn't hurt himself and all these things. And then he'll wake up and he's just up and down all night. And to stop Sebastian waking up, and because we've both got work, we inevitably end up, he comes into our bed and one of us go and sleep in his bed. And things like that aren't great for a relationship because, obviously it means that you're not, we don't have very much time together on our own, or even with Sebastian on our own sort of thing. So it's things like that. But having said that, Mel, then I'm sure there are plenty of families up and down, across the world with kids who are 5 who don't sleep, and who've got no Down syndrome at all. So, I try not to think, oh, poor me, because actually I don't really feel that way. I would love a full night's sleep. In fact, you can have my arm if I can have a full night's sleep. However, I try to kind of keep on the positive side of everything, because otherwise I think you would just, it would get you down. So I just try to kind of keep up. And as I said, we've got so much support around us and everything. So I'm sure we'll find time for a date night soon.
Well, if I was living over there, I'd give you one. Obviously, you've gone through the normalities of married life. You have to lean on each other through certain times and certain difficulties. But what is coming through is that you're very much a team. It's a real family unit. We're all in this together. We all work through it together. We all walk forward together. We all deal with it together. That's what I'm hearing about your family.
Yeah, I should say. I mean, we're not actually married, Mel. I must say. I don't want to hold myself out. I know, outrageous. But I'm still waiting for the diamond. I'll let you know if this interview shames him into asking me. But
I'm keeping this in here. Then this is staying. I'll make sure it stays.
Funnily enough, been together for 20 years this week. Been together a long time since we're in our early 20s, and we have our times, our ups and downs and our times, but generally we get on. We do work well together. We sort of bounce off each other well. And I think it helps to have that as a kind of foundation. I'm not saying that we don't want to sort of, kill each other from time to time, because of course we do, like anyone else. But I think with the children particularly, we know where we're going, we know what we want to achieve, and we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to pull together to give them the best we can. So I think that's really that's our focus.
This is the final question I ask everyone. The name of this podcast is called The Brain Game Changer: How Heartfelt Stories, Awareness and Education Can Change the Game. If there's one piece of information, one golden nugget, what would you want people to become aware of?
Don't be hard on yourself. If you find out either post or prenatally that your child has Down syndrome, you're going to feel like the world has ended, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. You have to embrace the fact that you feel that way, because that is natural. Most people have felt that way, but it isn't the end of the world. Please go and reach out and use as much information as you can to make the informed decision that's right for you. And if you do decide that you want to continue, please reach out for the support, because there is an amazing community out there of people. The people I've met since having Finn are just some of the most wonderful people that I'm so glad that our paths have crossed. And just be positive. Try and keep positive, because it may feel like the end of the world, but it genuinely isn't. And there's so much happening now in 2022 that means that things are looking up. That, for me, is the absolute key thing, that whether you're 12 weeks pregnant, 20 weeks pregnant, 35 weeks pregnant, or you've just had your baby, or even for some scenarios, if you found out 6 weeks after you've had your baby, which I've heard about, knowing that there is somebody without judgment you can talk to is the biggest thing. And that's what I'm trying to say about my closing ambit, which is that's what you need to do. You need to reach out. Don't be alone with your feelings, because so many people that in the support groups I'm in have exchanged and shared those feelings of utter despair and horror, and when you find out, and that's the thing, people, because you feel that way, you don't want to say that out loud because it sounds awful, but actually that is how you feel, and when you reach out, you'll realize that so many other people do feel that way, and people get that, and you can quickly move on from those feelings to discuss what's important to you to help you with your decision making.
I think you worded it all really well. I just want to say a huge thank you for your time today, giving us a couple of layers. Well, first and foremost, as a mother, and also as someone who is navigating through the system, even though, like you say, you've got law expertise, it's a hard system to navigate through when you need funding and you need support. And you're also shining a light on what it's like out there in the community and what is also out there for everyone else. And this has been amazing. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate you having me on your amazing podcast, and thank you so much, Mel.
I want to thank you for listening to this episode today and supporting the Brain Game Changer and the guests we interview. I hope it added some reassurance or valuable tools, no matter how big or small, that will continue assisting you in being the wonderful game changer that you are. The best way to support the Brain Game Changer podcast is to like, share with family and friends, or subscribe, so each weekly episode is easily available to you. I'd love to hear your feedback, and you can also find me on Instagram at The Brain Game Changer. Drop in and say hello, and check out the regular posts about awareness and education on various important topics and issues. Until next time, sending lots of love and light your way, and looking forward to sharing the space with you again soon. Take care.